a bit warm?
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets very warm in this car.
Does it?
Yeah, the heater is fantastic.
The heater's fantastic. I'm glad.
The AC is non-existent. But the
So it's a straight six under the bonnet, is it?
No, it's basically the heater's coming off that. That's what it is. Yeah.
Running hot already.
So.
Brown car guy. A brown car guy. Brown car guy.
So, Tom, how are you doing? Since the last time we spoke what? During the pandemic, we had a little chat, didn't we?
Yes.
About how we get to know each other in the Middle East and what you were doing and stuff like that.
That's right. We had a long video call because we weren't allowed to see each other. Yeah, we spoke about half an hour. I think that was about summer 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that long ago.
I remember it well.
So this is part 2 of that. Obviously, we've met a few times since then.
Yes.
And one of the things that you do, because you have an Instagram page called As Long As It's Black, right?
Any colour so long as it's black.
Any colour as long as it's black. So you're very keen to see this one.
Well, exactly. Yeah, and I should tell you about Any Colour So Long As It's Black is my sort of fan page. It's got at least maybe even 50 followers.
Yeah.
But hopefully after this there might be some more. But no, I always love black cars. So so I take pictures of black cars in London and around the world. I always take a side on, so no one sees any number plates. It's all very kind of anonymous. Apart from the car itself, which usually is a car that will stand out.
Yeah, of course.
So, but no, the moment Shazad, you said I found out you spotted that you bought such an incredible black Beamer such as this. I thought, right, I've got to come and get a shot. I've got to come and sit in it and see what it's like.
And verdict?
Very impressed. I mean, as I was telling you earlier, a great friend of mine, when we were kids, kind of just after leaving school, he had a 316i of this, the coupe, and we used to drive around it the whole time, music blaring, thinking we were really cool, 18-year-olds, 18-year-old idiots. And so seeing this, I'm looking forward to kind of telling him about this car, my experience within it, but also the fact this is a 325, whereas his was a 316i.
That's right. And, and as I was saying to you earlier, that I actually rate the 325i, the straight 6, more than the M3.
Yes.
Because I just feel that the performance is more accessible on this car.
Yes, you were saying about having to. I wasn't aware of this about the M3s. Always loved M3s, obviously, but never been in one, never driven one. But you were saying how they need constant revving. You've got to keep the revs high, churning out noisy, just to get the maximum performance.
This is it, I mean, again, this is like second gear in this one.
Oh yeah, that's got a bit of punch.
Yeah, that was from 2.5 RPM. So yeah.
Wow, yeah, instant.
Yeah.
Great. So you're gonna have much more fun driving this.
You do. You get the torque is much more instant in this car. But anyway, this is not a review of the BCG BMW E30.
It isn't.
Guys, go check it out. I have done a review of it, but go check it out. And Saudi Arabia is a place that for me used to be quite restrictive, quite closed up. But the way that it's opened up, I'll tell you, when I watched the Jeddah Grand Prix, for example.
Oh yes, of course.
And I remember sitting on those same roads with my mates, having a shawarma and a Bebzi and a Bebzi and watching the fountain that was the only thing to go and see there. But to now see F1 races and all of this stuff going on. But the Middle East in general is just amazing, isn't it? I mean, with Qatar having done the football World Cup there recently, it's just incredible how much things are progressing there. It's progressing.
It's high time the world took the Middle East seriously.
Yeah,
it really is in that sense. As with Dubai, is where we met, where I lived for 8 years, we certainly kind of led the charge on that, very much the sort of as a beacon, as sort of we're here, come. And I think now that's kind of set the foundation, and now you've got more kind of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, it's they're kind of taking what they have to the world. It's less as well, come visit us. Obviously the tourist is important, but the influence they're making across the world, the Middle East as a region as a whole, but certainly the UAE, Qatar obviously with the World Cup is a major thing, Saudi Arabia with its sort of cultural arm, but also then the sport with Formula One, as you just mentioned. It's high time that people took the Middle East seriously. They're going places, they're ambitious. Yes, there's a lot of funding there, but if you've got these funds and you've got this vision that all of those markets have in their own individual ways, then why not? I mean, it's
I mean, at least you're
it's
taking
really
the
going
funds and
up.
you're doing something with it, right? You're creating industry, you're creating enterprise, you're creating opportunities,
Yes.
whether it's for your own people or for international communities, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And each of those markets has their own nuance in what they offer.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, personally speaking, is to do with it's culture. It's real ancient history and how impactful that culture was.
Yeah. But
It's
also an important part of that culture
Oh.
is, of course, and this is an Arab tradition, is hospitality.
of course.
It's welcoming a guest, right?
Yeah, Ahlan wa Sahlan,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I think that's a bit. And now it's about certainly Saudi being proud of what it
Yeah.
has, and the Middle East as a whole to say, look what we've got, look what we can do,
Yeah.
and that sort of arrival, let's call it,
Yeah.
on the sort of the global table, for
Yeah.
want of a better phrase, it's about time and it needs to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, at the same time, we can't talk about its ambition, its drive, and its growth without talking about some of the things that certainly the markets
Well,
might not want to talk
I was
about.
going to say, I mean, I'm sure a few people watching this are going, yeah, but
Well, hold on, yeah,
especially
yeah. Well,
because
hold on a sec, yeah,
well,
exactly,
especially here
yeah.
in the UK, in sort of where we are now, and when you look at media coverage, so say for example, when there was media coverage of Qatar during the World Cup, it's quite interesting because of all of the hot water that Gary Lineker got himself into recently,
Yeah,
which
well.
by the way, I think he was right to do what he did,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it has to be said that he did speak out about Qatar as well, but that was almost a BBC sanctioned thing that he had to
Yes.
do. And I remember at the time, I think I read a report somewhere that one of the reporters was complaining that whenever we bring a good news story from Qatar, nobody's running it. People wanted the bad news stories from Qatar. And I think it was a little bit negative on the part of the media to be trying to sort of, find the bad points. And in an event that by all accounts, by everything that everybody's told me, was actually really good, really well organized, and everybody really enjoyed it.
Yes. I think. I mean, sadly, with media, I heard a very not quite crude phrase, but if it bleeds, it leads.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's any sort of mistreatment of people, death, obviously, invariably kind of comes to the front of media in that
Yeah.
regard. But it is. I think those sort of markets have to understand that. International journalists will ask those questions,
Yeah.
and there will be questions about human rights,
That's right.
and hydrocarbons, given the climate change, etc. They will ask what could be perceived as difficult questions. But what I always advise my clients, and what I advise and consult them to do, is you have to answer those questions. You have to have proper answers. You have to put your hand up and be honest. Yes, things have been like this, but we're changing them. And here are some valid proof points to show that the things have changed. I mean, when I worked with Abu Dhabi last year in the UAE, there was questions about human rights, but yes, there were historically, but certainly the UAE is taking great steps to rectify those.
I think that's a really good point, isn't it? Because I think that the other aspect of this is where people talk about human rights aspects, or they talk about gay rights and stuff like that, and they say, well, it's not allowed. And I'm like, well, we won't go there, or we'll boycott the place. I'm like, well, surely that's defeating the point, because surely what you need to do is to engage people in conversation. And I think what you raised there is a really interesting point, because I remember years and years ago there was that Panorama documentary about the UAE, wasn't there? About the circumstances around the labor camps and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I remember, and I remember in the wake of that, there were huge changes.
Yes.
There were massive changes. So actually, just by talking about this, about engaging people, it's not like those countries deliberately want to do this stuff, but they're like, when you highlight it, or when you talk to them, or when you engage people in conversation, then suddenly you find that they go, okay, well, actually, let's look at this. Let's see if we can improve this. Let's see if we can progress. And surely that's a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. I think conversation leads to action, and I think that's very much so. I think they do have to shine a light on perhaps the darker practices and things that did happen, as you said, to kind of make sure that, okay, well, we're getting potentially beaten with a stick by the international media, but actually in this day and age on a global scale, we want to be appealing to global visitors and our own reputation. It's important to kind of have those difficult conversations, and those will hopefully lead to more positive, accepting, welcoming sort of action. I think that's a key part, and the sooner the sort of well, obviously this is happening in the Middle East. If that can be accelerated, and that sort of maturity and kind of a bit of humility can be adopted, then the quicker they're going to kind of arrive at the party globally, as I see it.
No, the thing is what it's interesting that we're talking now about difficult conversations, because the other thing that you do, actually involves a lot of
Take that
different.
hat off and put
The other hat, which I found was absolutely fascinating, and this is something new that you're doing now, right?
Yes.
And this is basically it's tackling fires. It's firefighting, isn't it? But not in a literal sense.
Not literally. No, I'm not putting on the hard hat or the flame-proof outfit. No, I mean I've worked in public relations 23 years, so
which is where we met,
which is
because
how
you
we-
were doing Mercedes, and we've
General
had lots of
Motors,
experiences
yeah.
driving Mercs around Yas Marina,
Yes.
circuit at high speed and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, we must
this is very different to
This
that.
is very different, but you must remember that what brought me to the Middle East was the reputation protection for General Motors. And
Right,
General Motors
right.
business. And that sort of issues and crisis, issues management, crisis preparedness regarding when they went bankrupt. And that has always been that element of what I do, that firefighting, that is what we call in the trade issues and crisis, has long been something I've been interested in. Back when I was a young executive many years ago, I worked on the Marchioness inquiry about the sinking of the Marchioness in London for my client, the Port of London Authority, and what the impact of that was, and who was to blame, and etc., etc. But more importantly, how making sure such a thing could never happen again. So that sort of issues and crisis experience there. I mean, I was constantly cutting out big clippings, and back in the day then really turned me on to that sort of how can we make things better, how can we ensure this doesn't happen again sort of stuff. So throughout my career I've kind of enjoyed that issues and crisis stuff. I did it with General Motors. I then, when I came back to London, I worked with the global sports retailer, sports brand, handling their global issues and crisis throughout COVID, and any issue in their world would come across my desk. So I've always enjoyed that sort of that sharper end of comms and public relations. So so you talk about that. So that's what I really want. That's the other cap.
So what is it that you actually do now? So paint an example of what you might find yourself doing in a day-to-day work environment.
Well, with this, I mean, I'm figuring out, as we discussed earlier, figuring out exactly what my offer is in that reputation space. I've done it a lot for brands. I've worked with the Rolexes and Mercedes-Benz and the Pepsis and the Coca-Colas and all that sort of stuff. What I want to do is bring that experience into more sort of personal, looking at high net worth individuals, successful business people who just need that bit of counsel behind the sort of man in the background to kind of advise them on stuff. Let's say in the world of business nowadays, you see big acquisitions. This club's been bought by that person. This, whatever, it might be a buyout of this. And when you kind of these strange names pop up, and people are, well, who's that guy? Or who's that woman? Who's she? Or what's the positioning around her? So it's that sort of reputation I want to work in. It's that sort of positioning, placement, ensuring that when these sort of things, people are kind of, when they are coming into the public eye or coming into the eye of key stakeholders around them, that people understand and can find easily information that is accurate and that tells the story that person wants the world to know about.
Yeah. But also the other thing that we discussed was that we live in an era now of something called cancel culture.
Yes.
Where we all have to be so careful about what we're saying and what, and again, going back to the Gary Lineker situation or other situations like that, where, as many people that came out and supported him, there were also people that came out and said that he was referencing the Holocaust and he shouldn't have done this, he shouldn't have said that. And, I always have a little bit of an issue with this, because, at the end of the day, I feel that, just shutting people up is not necessarily the answer. Because by shutting people up, by shutting them down, you're not actually changing their point of view. The point of view still exists. It still festers within. And I think that one of the things that I learned, sorry to mention the dreaded Brexit word, but one of the things that I learned about Brexit was that, I was reaching a point at that time of our lifetimes when I was thinking that, maybe racism actually is a thing of the past now in the UK, and then of course Brexit happened, and suddenly it was like a license for all these people to come out and say things, and then you realize that maybe it hadn't gone away, it just people had felt that they couldn't say what they wanted to say. And to an extent I'm like, what, I want to hear them say what they want to say, because at least then we can tackle that conversation, at least we can have that conversation with them, at least we can know that people think in certain ways.
Yes, we can have that conversation. It kind of goes back to the point I made earlier about these difficult issues that the Middle East doesn't like talking about by having that conversation, and we can bring them into the open. And I think that echoes the point you've just made about the cancel culture turning people off, so to speak, killing the mic, whatever you want to call it. They're still going to do that, but you're kind of pushing them underground. You're pushing them out of the public eye.
You haven't changed their mind.
You haven't changed their mind. You've just kind of turned them off and potentially even kind of incited them to actually, you know what, well, I'm going to go off in a different direction far more aggressively, and potentially that can lead to...
we both have spent time in the Middle East, and as we know, that banning stuff never works.
No, not
banning
really.
stuff never really. It actually makes it more interesting. So that's what actually happens. You know,
it makes it more risky, and then you go into the black market, whatever it might be. But yes, that's a nice little pickup there. It certainly zips this car, that's for sure. I think it's everyone's swift, because at the moment, if you don't agree, I think what's happening in the world, people are realising or coming to the conclusion that if someone doesn't agree with them, that person's wrong. Yeah. And therefore, if a difference of opinion is, oh, that's it, I can't possibly relate to this person.
That's it, yeah.
And that's sort of kind of happening on a wider scale.
And one of the things that we used to recognize before was that we can have differences of opinion. You know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a difference of opinion. You know?
Oh, it's healthy. I mean, for God's sake, if the world, all the world thought the same about everything, it'd be a very mundane place to be. Yeah. And the conversations would be very sort of, oh, what do you think of this? I thought it was great. Oh, I thought it was great too. What are you going to talk about?
Exactly.
Oh, what do you like about it? Well, I liked everything. Oh, what did you like? Oh, I liked everything too.
No,
thanks.
No, and the thing is, like, now bringing this back home, this conversation that we're having about, you know, reputations and being careful about what you're saying and cancel culture and all that. And obviously, as you know, I'm doing a lot of stuff around ULEZ at the moment. You know, and ULEZ, of course, is an issue that, you know, gets a lot of people very, very excited. And you know, one of the things that happened recently was that Sadiq Khan in a meeting basically dismissed anybody that was objecting to ULEZ as far-right COVID deniers, climate deniers, you know, and for me, I find it really difficult, because I'm not far-right, I'm not COVID denier, I'm not, I've had all my vaccines, I had my boosters and everything, you know, and I had COVID when we didn't have any vaccines, and it was not good,
not much fun.
Not good, I can tell you that much, you know, and I feel strongly about the climate as well, you know, but at the same time, I'm trying to approach this in a journalistic way, in an objective way, to look at, you know, whether what he's doing is justified or not. But again, there's always that risk of being just shut down, because people say, oh, well, you're anti-climate, or you're anti-this, or whatever, you know.
Well, people have an agenda. Sadiq certainly, Mr. Khan certainly has many, I would conject. And then people don't want to hear that noise, because it pricks their ego on a kind of individual level. But it's, you know, when Sadiq's trying to create this huge, great thing that's, for whatever reason, people are saying, you know, no one likes naysayers, really, because it's like, I'm trying to say my piece, and no one likes being heckled. But I mean, in a political forum such as this, I think it's absolutely vital that people have been voted into a position of power must listen to and must have the stones thrown at them.
Yeah, and they must be able to engage. Yeah, verbal stones. Yeah, literally. Yeah, let's be quite clear about that. Exactly. But they must also be able to engage. You can't just be dismissive.
No, you can't just be dismissive. You've got to listen, you engage, understand viewpoints, and hopefully that would, as long as those are heard, whether they're actioned ultimately by the person leading this agenda, is to be neither here nor there. But you have to entertain them. Yeah. You have to entertain them, and you should expect them. You should expect naysayers, and this goes through every level of politics. You've been voted in. Everyone has their right to give that person a hard time and say, look, we voted you in, you should do this, that, and the other. And if his agenda isn't as robust, or maybe contains falsehoods, I'm not an expert on ULEZ, far from it, but from our conversations, there's some, and from your content.
But you are a Londoner.
But I'm a Londoner born and bred.
So you must have some viewpoint on it then.
Yeah, I think, this is like when the congestion charge first came in. It's congestion charge plus 20 years ago. And I think whether it's about looking at the facts as opposed to what we're being told. What's the, you know, I'm very good at communicating about the public relations. We can hear, you know, what people want us to hear, but actually that has to be supported by robust proof points and facts. And from what I can understand of this ULEZ thing, we're maybe not quite talking about all the actual proof points and facts. And reports and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, don't worry, I'm not kidnapping you. No.
I'm going to an industrial estate. We're at.
I'm going to actually go back down that road because that's quite a nice road.
Gotcha. This is my last mistransmission, everybody. Nice to see you all.
He was last seen.
Gullymore Farm. That's where I got that.
So there you go. Tell everybody.
There we go. Let's get out of there super fast.
There you go.
Well done. But yeah, it's a tricky one. It's you know, people drive cars. You know, it's all very well, you know, having public transport. I've always used the tube. I've always used public transport. It's the fastest way around London.
Yeah,
I was lucky enough to.
Exactly.
I was lucky enough to be born in central London, so it's been. You know, I don't have a car now. I don't need a car. If I need a car, I'll rent a zip car or something like that. But for people further out, it's absolutely essential.
Well, I mean, here we are.
Self-included. We're kind of driving through the countryside.
Yeah, I mean, look at this. I mean, we're still within the M25.
Yes, and it's green and
You know, how are you going to get a bus here?
No, and how you're going to get? There might be a bus, but it might come every hour and a half.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got to live your life, and it's. I think I don't know. I mean, it's central London, fair enough. I think, but on the outer rim of that, it's going to be difficult. It's going to make people stay at home more. It's going to kind of limit people's movement, much as we felt during the pandemic. We weren't allowed to go anywhere. We weren't allowed to leave our houses.
But do you think that the pandemic and the lockdown and the fact that we were also obedient at that time has maybe given authorities the license to go, right, well, you know what, let's see what other of your freedoms we can restrict or control?
Well, I mean that's a big wide conversation. But I think
let's open that can of worms.
Yeah, let's open up that Pandora's box. Because I certainly have some strong opinions on that, but maybe not for this one. But I think no. But you know, it's like a rubber band. You stretch it, it's going to snap back. Yeah. And I think it's kind of almost the opposite. You've compressed it, it's now going to pop out again.
Yeah.
After 2 years of, as we said, you know, thank God it's all in the past now, and we look back on those times and think it's all quite surreal.
It is really, isn't it? I mean,
that really happened?
It's quite extraordinary, isn't it?
It's quite bizarre. But also, I think, well, just because it happened then does not mean we should. The diktat of the people that run this country try to is something that they should always be adhered to, and that again goes back to my point of challenging those who've been voted in, challenging authority where relevant, and certainly when it is likely to make a major impact in people's way of life, but also their sort of their mental health and their sort of, you know, we know how bad COVID was for a lot of people trapped at home, didn't see anybody. You know, a lot of people, you see stories about the NHS and vast amounts of antidepressants being handed out, etc., etc. It's not good. Limiting people's movement in whatever way, shape, or form is not good for their soul.
And the thing is, this is what I talk about a lot in some of my videos as well. It's the mental health aspect of just doing what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
Which, you know, to a lot of people, I know a lot of people may not be able to relate to something like this, but I know you can relate to it. But as a car guy, I mean, you know, this is something that, I mean, A, the pleasure of owning a vehicle like this, and B, just being able to do this. Yeah. There's a, this is closed, I think. There's a
handbrake turn. Get away from here.
There's a therapeutic effect, you know, of doing what I'm doing now and just enjoying a car, just going, even though it's raining and it's traffic and it's terrible, but still, it's not
raining in here, thank God.
We could open a sunroof. But you know, and I think that these things are too easily dismissed, you know, and you talk about, you know, for the sake of, when I've talked about this at length, obviously, and the fact that they talk about what is the impact of toxic air, and allegedly, you know, by having cleaner air, it'll add an extra 6 months to our lives. And I'm like, well, I'd rather have an extra hour of doing this, you know, than 6 months when I'm 81 or whatever.
85, decrepit. No, indeed. I think, it is a balance, I suppose. There is, I don't know, it's you know, short. You got to live now, live in the moment. What you enjoy, what's taking that sort of pleasure. And you're a car guy. I'm a car guy too. I mean, I don't drive, very rarely drive, sadly. But when I do, I certainly enjoy it. It's a fun thing with whatever car I'm in, to that regard. But it's that sort of limiting and being caged by someone, by powers that be, that it's not a personal choice. Your only choice is being taken away from you. And that, again, as you talked about, you know, that sort of, you know, forcing people to do things and control and all this sort of stuff, it's, you know, it might not kind of happen immediately, you might not feel that, but as time goes on,
it's
that starts
creeping,
to wear
isn't it?
you
It's
down.
creeping, yeah.
It starts to wear one down as an individual. It starts to wear society down.
And I think this is my problem with the ULEZ expansion, you know, because I've said this on record several times, that I'm not actually against ULEZ per se in central London. I've never actually been against it because I grew up, I was born in central London. I grew up in central London. I'm like, yeah, okay, you know, you don't, like you live in London, you don't have a car. And I completely understand that. Technically, you don't need one. That's fine.
No,
Here it's a different story.
It's expense, yeah.
But A, it's a different story.
Yes.
B, their own report says that there's no actual benefit to it. And C, it just feels like the tumbling of our freedoms, you know. And I think this is why I keep saying the line has to be drawn here, because we have to draw the line somewhere.
Yes.
Because at some point it's just going to be like, oh, we've taken this away, now let's take this away, now let's take this away. And every time we're like, okay, you know, and it's, where does that go, you know?
When does it stop? I mean, who knows? I mean, that's again for another platform, but I think it's a risky thing. I mean, it's, you know, if it's proven, but it's, I don't know. I mean, as I said, you're the expert on this, but nonetheless, we have to have our right to protest, which is another thing that's been up for debate recently. And okay, I'm not sure what I'd be interested to hear your views about the people who've been sort of lying in the roads and blocking London and Extinction Rebellion and all this sort of stuff. I'm not sure how successful those tactics have been.
I think they've just annoyed people.
I think
that's the problem.
Frustrated, you know? Everybody.
I mean, I've been on, you know, not to big up the protests that are going on anti-ULEZ, but I've been on 3 of those now. I've been 2 in Trafalgar Square, and I'm going to another one this weekend on tomorrow, in fact.
Okay.
You know, and all of those protests, they've been very careful not to block any roads, not to obstruct anything. There was a march down to Downing Street in the last one.
Sure.
But
it's only just down the road.
But it's just down the road, and the police were basically handling that, and it wasn't really a problem, and it was all very peaceful and everything. And then afterwards, everybody went home. You know, and I think that you know they weren't just staying there. But I think that, you know, when I see people, you know, throwing paint on Ferrari showrooms, or actually worse, was it Frankfurt, where people glued themselves to classic Ferraris.
Oh, I didn't see that. That's criminal.
People, if somebody did that to my car, it would break my heart. Honestly, seriously. Apart from then, I would break their necks. You know, I mean, a different story. I didn't say that on record. Did I say that on record? I didn't mean that.
You'd be very upset, Shazad.
I would be very annoyed. Yeah,
I can fully relate to that too. Yeah.
But I think that is just out of order. But I think that yes, absolutely, we have this is a fundamental right that we have here: the right to protest, the right to make our opinions known. And people say, well, what's the point? What will it achieve? I'm like, well, okay, maybe at that moment it won't achieve anything, but collectively it could alter opinions, it could alter thinking, right?
It adds to the conversation.
Yeah.
It's what we talked about. It adds to the conversation. Yeah, there were 10,000 people, 1,000 people, million people, whatever it is, and they're all voting with their feet, and it's that personal choice. If you feel strongly about something, you should have a right to go and protest, stand around,
thing about
not act like an idiot and start damaging stuff, throwing paint around, being a nuisance. But you have every right to protest on a march, chant, and all the rest of it.
But the interesting thing is that several people have told me that have been on these protests that I've spoken to in interviews and stuff like that, and they said we've never protested before in our lives.
Sure.
And this is all of a sudden they've come out at this thing because that's how much it affects them, and that's how strongly they feel.
How strongly they feel, and they voted with their feet. And I think that's they've shown up. And I think that, you know, just alluding back to sort of the Middle East in that sense, it's like if you agree with what, you know, if you disagree with what historically has happened in some of these Middle Eastern markets, don't go. And you have every right to say, no, I disagree with that. I think it's atrocious, awful, heinous, which are all perfectly apt words to describe what's happened there historically. But it's changing, and they're trying to change that. But if you still don't like it, fair enough.
No,
but it's not up to me to tell you to change your mind. It's not. That's a personal choice, and long as it should remain. And that personal choice is the most, you know, the most important thing you have.
It is, absolutely.
And if people start taking that away, people have every right to get a bit miffed and upset about that, understandably. And so I think I think that right to protest is important.
So anyway, let's come to the end of this, and as we do, you don't own a car at the moment, but if you did buy a car, what would you get?
If I was to buy a car,
this is for yourself.
What, money, no object?
I know.
Sort of
it would
dream
be
car.
Well, let's say your consultancy's hit the big time. You've got a couple of A-list celebs on your books now.
So you're doing rather well.
You're doing rather well.
I've always
what are you treating yourself to?
That's a bit more, rather than dream car sort of stuff. Doing very successfully. What I'd really like, I've always had a hankering for RS4s, RS6s.
All right.
I remember seeing, there used to be, when my dear grandmother was alive, we used to go see her. There was there used to be one of the blue RS4 Avants.
Yes.
Before the RS even
Yeah,
came, was
yeah.
even a thing.
Yeah.
It was a combination with Porsche.
Yeah.
And you had the big lights at the back, and
Yeah.
it had the Porsche rims. And it was this cobalt blue, and I remember
Yes.
thinking that's the most amazing car I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so I know, I every time I see one of those, I hanker for them because
Yeah.
it's that sort of undercover. Yeah, it's a family car, isn't it? And, and
exactly.
they just look great. I mean, they're getting the RS6 nows are getting a bit huge. Like, there's
They're
one near-
massive
not
and they're
one near-
very fast.
Yeah, you've had a ride on one. I'm very jealous.
Yeah.
Lucky you. There's a couple of near me which I like the idea of. I like that, but probably the RS4 is probably a bit more nimble. I mean, I didn't have any.
But the RS4 is a good one. But I'll tell you one thing: if you're going to get one, you better do it quickly because prices on these cars
Yes.
now. The weird thing is something weird is happening with 80s, 90s cars right now.
Yes.
And the prices are going a little bit crazy. I don't know if you heard about the Ford Cosworth.
Yes, I did
It
see
went
that.
for
yes.
$500,000.
Yeah, I
It's
think there was
crazy.
two people
Yeah.
playing silly buggers.
Yeah. Apparently, it's going to Dubai.
Oh, really?
I don't know for sure, but somebody said to me,
Well,
yeah, it's going to Dubai. I'm like, well, that makes sense.
That makes sense. Dubai price point.
Yeah. But anyway, Tom, it's been so great to see you again.
Likewise.
I hope
Always
you like the black BMW.
Yeah, of course. How could I not?
And can't wait to do this again. And wish
Thank
you
you, Shazad.
all the best of luck with the things that you're doing right
Thank
now.
you very much for that. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Brown car guy.
Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please hit the like button and share this video as well if you can. And while you're at it, check out these guys who also sponsor my content. I am deeply grateful to them because it helps me to buy new equipment, put fuel in the cars, and yes, buy a cup of coffee. You can do the same. Just go here or right here on YouTube. Just hit these three little dots down here and click on thanks. Make sure you're signed in first. My content is free, but this is how you can help me keep it that way. I may even send you a gift. Oh, by the way, watch this next.